For years, we may have been aspiring to slow down the pace of our lives, to simplify things, to relax more, to forget what day of the week it is. I hear that's one of the big problems with people not going to work. And we thought that this would bring us happiness. But slowing down the pace of our lives can also be quite confronting, can't it? What do I do with all this time on my hands? How do I structure my day? I'm afraid to sit still with myself. And how do I deal with feeling lonely? Many of us may have been wishing for an extended time off of work or school, an extended vacation from social obligations and various responsibilities, and we imagine that this would bring us happiness too. But it can be quite unsettling and disorienting, even scary, when our work routines are interrupted in unexpected ways, especially for those who have lost their jobs. And for those working from home, they're reporting that it takes twice the amount of energy for half the productivity. Many of you may have been wishing to have more time to spend with your children or your partner, your aging parents, your family, your friends. And we were probably sure that this would bring us happiness. But probably if you're sheltering at home with your children or your partner or your aging parents or your friends, you've discovered by now that the first week was delightful, novel, adventurous, fun. And by the second or third week, you're thinking, when are they going to leave? We heard this from some of our friends. I saw a cartoon recently that said, we have a new game in our house. It's called, Why Do You Do It That Way, Honey? And there's no winner. Or maybe our biggest challenge right now is being separated from our loved ones and not being able to actually meet with them. That's happening quite often these days. Or maybe many of you have been wishing for rainy days to get started on or finish some home improvement or some home repair, confident that this would bring a sense of satisfaction and contentment, only to find that perhaps now it's very challenging to get anything done because the stores are closed or they have limited hours and it's hard to get there. And no doubt some people watching have been hoping and praying for more time for your spiritual practice, or maybe the opportunity to do a retreat, thinking that surely this would bring more peace and happiness. And perhaps you've attempted more Dharma practice at home or online, so many opportunities now, or wondered how to structure a retreat, but found your mind too fearful, too anxious for your own or loved one's health and well-being to really make use of that time. The pandemic offers us a chance to examine some of our projections of where happiness comes from and to identify the misconceptions that inevitably bring suffering instead of happiness that we wanted. I love the phrase, the only time we suffer is when we're out of touch with reality. We suffer because we fail to see how things actually exist. The problem is we often don't recognize that we're out of touch with reality. We don't recognize when we're not seeing how things exist. But the Buddha kindly, clearly pointed out the four most common misconceptions that distort our reality. We think of impure things as pure. We think of what is actually in the nature of suffering as happiness. We think of impermanent things as being permanent or enduring. And we think of what is selfless as having a self. So as the Lam Rim reminds us, initially it's this misconception of the impermanent as permanent that causes the most suffering. And if someone asked us, are you permanent? We would say no. Intellectually, we understand that. But if we really examine how we react, especially in a situation like a pandemic where our emotions are stirred up, we'll find that actually we do grasp at ourselves to be enduring. One of my favorite poems is called "'Tis a Fearful Thing," and it goes like this. "'Tis a fearful thing to love what death can touch, a fearful thing to love, to hope, to dream, and oh to be, and oh to lose. A thing for fools this, and a holy thing to love. For your life has lived in me, your laugh once lifted me, your word was a gift to me. To remember this brings painful joy. 'Tis a human thing, love, a holy thing, to love what death can touch." So death comes in the normal course of life, and so it makes sense that we work to accept it. The Buddha said that a place to say untouched by death does not exist. It doesn't exist in space. It doesn't exist in the ocean. It doesn't stay in the middle of a mountain. And if we accept that death and impermanence is part of life, then when these things actually come to us, we can face them more easily. I've been quite moved watching some of the short documentaries of the toll the coronavirus has had on people in northern Italy. Maybe you've watched some of those. The descriptions of endless sirens wailing through empty village streets, taking people to the hospitals. And also seeing short videos from doctors and other medical workers describing the situations in the hospitals in New York City. These are very moving, very touching. Gives us a small window into what it's been like in areas that have been hard hit by the pandemic. Luckily, many of our teachers share with us how deeply impacted they have been by the loss of a teacher, or maybe the loss of a parent, loss of a country. Even His Holiness has been quite frank about this. Understanding reality doesn't mean that we lose our capacity to feel emotions like grief or loss or sadness. But those emotions are placed in a context, in a framework that supports us to maintain a balanced mind, to keep a broader perspective on death and the continuity of life. In the Satipatthana Sutta, the Buddha gave detailed instructions on how to counter these 4 misconceptions that I mentioned. And one was particularly poignant for me during the winter retreat, meditation on mindfulness of the body. I found it quite helpful to familiarize with my own impermanence and eventual death, and also the impermanence of others. So in general, meditating on the mindfulness of the body supports our understanding that although the body appears to be very pure, it's actually quite impure. And so when we examine it closely, we find that's not the case, going through the 32 parts of the body and really analyzing each part to see how it exists. The head hair, body hair, nails, teeth, skin. But in addition to analyzing the impurity of the body, another aspect of that meditation is analyzing the impermanence of each part of the body. And this is what I found most helpful. There's never a moment that any part of the body, and therefore the self, myself, other self, is not changing. So as monastics, the first body part mentioned is the head hair. As monastics, we shave our head. And so it's very obvious to us how quickly the hair grows. It's changing moment to moment. Head hair, body hair, watching maybe one long eyebrow grow out and then eventually it falls out. Noticing more facial hair coming as the years go by. The nails, we intentionally keep our nails short. We don't polish our nails here, but just noticing how often, the need is to pull out the nail clipper and clip the nails. The teeth, the skin, I find more thoughts coming up like, oh, my skin sure looks more like my mother's and my grandmother's every day. So that's changing. You too? Then it moves on to muscles, over 650 muscles, depending on how you dissect them or divide them. These are constantly changing, and that's obvious to those of us who work in the forest. And the more you work in the forest, your muscles change. The less you work in the forest, probably you don't notice that so much. The muscles, the sinews, the bones. There's a complete skeleton within each one of us. That is fascinating to really think about. Over 200 bones inside each of us, and each one of those bones constantly changing. The kidneys, the heart pumping around 100,000 times each day. Really feeling that, really appreciating that it keeps pumping. The liver, the diaphragm, the spleen, the lungs, around 18,000 breaths each day. So putting our attention on each one of these body parts and thinking about its impermanence then really brings home the point that not only is the body part impermanent, but the self that is made up or imputed upon independence upon those body parts is also impermanent. And so I found this helpful also to extend to the people that I love and care about and am attached to. My mother's 87, and she lives in an independent living center for older adults. If coronavirus appeared there, chances are very good that she would easily succumb to that. And so just thinking about, also my mother is impermanent. Anything impermanent is subject to aging and death. I'm sure I'll grieve her dearly when she dies, but I'm trying to do what I can to prepare my mind, to be realistic for the eventuality that will come one day. So as we increase our understanding that things are always changing, like our body, then even if we're passing through a very difficult period like we are right now, as a community, as a society, as a country, as a global society, then we can find comfort in knowing, as Venerable mentioned this morning, that the situation will not remain that way forever. So there's really no need for worry or frustration. Contemplating impermanence not only motivates our spiritual practice, but also fuels it if we really take time to do the meditations. It's like a good friend cautioning us to be careful, to be earnest, because another day is passing, and to ask ourselves, how well are we spending our time?